An attack on one is an attack on all. That is NATO's Article 5. But what if Poland decides to invoke it after the Russian drone incursion? Would it trigger World War III? According to Reuters, dozens of Russian drones have crossed into Polish airspace in the past 48 hours, with at least one striking a residential building while families were watching the evening news. Poland has already triggered NATO's Article 4, which is the clause that allows any member to call an urgent consultation when its security feels threatened. But there is another clause, far heavier, hanging like a shadow over this moment. It is Article 5. If Article 4 is the alarm, Article 5 is the trigger. It states that an armed attack against one NATO member is considered an attack against them all, obligating every ally to respond. In more than 70 years of history, it has been invoked only once, after the attacks of September 11th. In this video, we will walk through what would happen if Poland decided to cross that line and invoke Article 5 after this drone incursion. We will examine what it takes to trigger it, what the first 24 hours would look like, how the United States would respond, the three possible paths NATO could take, and the pressure points Russia could exploit to retaliate. By the end, you will see how a single decision in Brussels could transform the entire global order overnight. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you do not miss our in-depth reports on the world's most critical flashpoints. Triggering NATO's Article 5 is not something that happens with a simple declaration. It is not enough to say we were attacked. According to NATO procedures, three elements are required. First, hard forensic evidence that proves the incident was a deliberate attack, not an accident or a malfunction. Second, unanimous political agreement among all 32 NATO members gathered in the North Atlantic Council. And third, a final operational decision that in practice would hinge on the approval of the United States. Because without U.S. military power, no collective response would carry real deterrent weight. It is a legal process, but even more a political one, and every step carries enormous consequences. In these tense hours, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk has warned that Poland is at its closest point to open conflict since the Second World War. Those words carry the weight of history, because they describe the razor-thin line between defense and war. But here is the question: would a single drone strike be enough to cross that line? Or will NATO leaders still try to buy time, hoping this violation fades as an isolated incident? If Poland were to invoke Article 5, the first 24 hours would be unlike anything Europe has seen in decades. According to NATO procedures, the North Atlantic Council would be called into an emergency session with ambassadors and military chiefs from all 32 member nations joining either in Brussels or via secure encrypted channels. The tone would shift instantly from diplomacy to defense. NATO's pre-existing defense plans for Eastern Europe, known as graduated response plans, would be activated. Air forces from Germany, the US, and the UK would be placed on immediate standby, and additional AWACS surveillance planes would start circling over Poland and the Baltic states. Cyber commands, especially US Cyber Command, would move to high alert to guard against retaliatory Russian cyber strikes on power grids, hospitals, or banking systems. Fuel, ammunition, and food stockpiles in NATO's eastern flank would be unlocked and prepositioned, preparing for a potential ground conflict. As reported by The Drive, NATO did not change its formal posture even after dozens of Russian drones crossed into Polish airspace just days ago. That restraint would disappear the moment Article 5 is triggered. Every NATO capital would assume that an attack could follow within hours. This is the snap from deterrence to mobilization, and once it begins, there is no going back to business as usual without a political deal. The clock would start ticking loudly, and everyone, from generals to families with deployed soldiers, would hear it. If Article 5 were triggered, the first 72 hours would not look like a normal military buildup. They would look like controlled chaos. According to Reuters, NATO maintains pre-approved defense plans for every region of Europe, including Poland and the Baltic states. These plans would be activated instantly. Within hours, U.S. transport planes from Ramstein Air Base in Germany and Norfolk in Virginia would begin ferrying troops, vehicles, and ammunition east. By day 2, forward logistics hubs in Poland and Lithuania would be running at full speed. American families would be watching deployment alerts on their phones, knowing that a loved one could be on those flights. Cyber posture would rise to maximum readiness. The U.S. Cyber Command, as reported by Defense One, would coordinate with NATO's Cooperative Cyber Defense Center in Tallinn to shield military networks from Russian intrusion. Civilian infrastructure would quietly go on alert too. Utilities, banks, and hospitals would receive new federal guidance to expect and repel cyber disruptions. Stockpiles of fuel and critical medical supplies would be redistributed across Europe, while the Pentagon would order American munitions production lines to accelerate. By the first week, U.S. Rapid Reaction Forces would be fully operational in eastern Poland, alongside British, French, and German units. American destroyers from the 6th Fleet would shift position in the Baltic and the Mediterranean, signaling deterrence to Moscow. According to the BBC, this phase would carry the highest risk of miscalculation. Every radar ping, every jet scramble, every convoy movement could be misread as a prelude to attack. This is what analysts call the fog of escalation. It is the moment when deterrence blurs into provocation, and when a single mistake could ignite something far larger than anyone intended. Ask yourself, how would America handle this? With calm precision, or with fear driving every decision? Because once the machine starts moving, stopping it is no longer simple. What would Article 5 mean not for generals or diplomats, but for ordinary Americans? The answer is both immediate and personal. According to AP News, the United States currently has over 10,000 troops stationed in Poland and the Baltic states. If NATO entered collective defense mode, that number could double within weeks. It would start with activation notices quietly landing in inboxes. Parents eating dinner would see their sons and daughters called back to base. Weekend plans would be replaced with deployment briefings. For many families, the war would begin at the kitchen table. Then comes the economic echo. Wars are expensive, and markets react before the first shot is fired. As reported by the Wall Street Journal, even rumors of escalation send oil and gas prices surging. Gas could jump to $7 or $8 a gallon within days. Airline tickets would spike. Grocery chains, already operating on tight margins, would face delays and price hikes as shipping routes shift and insurance premiums soar. Imagine standing at the gas pump or the checkout line, realizing that a drone over Poland just made your life more expensive. There is also the digital front. According to Defense One, U.S. intelligence agencies expect Russian cyber retaliation to target civilian infrastructure as much as military systems. That means banks, hospitals, and power grids. Picture trying to pay your bills while your bank system is down. Picture hospitals delaying treatments because diagnostic networks are offline. The war would not just be overseas. It would hum in the background of American life, in every screen, every receipt, every blackout warning. And hovering over it all is the psychological weight. A war with Russia would not feel distant. It would feel like a countdown, an invisible clock ticking over daily life. Every news alert would raise heart rates. Every siren would make people wonder, is this just a test or is it real? This is the hidden cost of Article 5. It does not just move armies. It moves the emotional baseline of a nation. So ask yourself, is America ready to carry that weight, knowing it could all begin with one drone, one explosion, on the far edge of Europe? If Poland were to invoke Article 5, what would happen next? The truth is that NATO's collective defense clause does not dictate a specific kind of response. It does not say that missiles must fly or tanks must roll. It simply says that an attack on one member is considered an attack on all, and that all allies will respond as they deem necessary. That means there is room for choices, and analysts see three main paths. The first is minimization. In this scenario, NATO leaders agree to classify the drone strikes as an error, a technical malfunction that crossed the border by mistake. According to Reuters, this approach has precedent. During the Cold War, aircraft occasionally strayed over NATO territory and were escorted back without triggering military action. Here, the messaging would be about restraint and de-escalation. Public statements would emphasize that while the incident was serious, it does not meet the threshold of an armed attack. For Americans, this would mean no immediate changes, no troop surges, no market panic, no sudden draft notices. But it would carry an invisible cost. Moscow might read it as hesitation, as proof that NATO's red lines are soft. The second path is limited response. NATO could boost air defenses in Poland, deploy additional F-35 squadrons and Patriot missile batteries, and impose new economic sanctions on Russia. According to AP News, the alliance has pre-planned defensive deployments that can move within 72 hours. Cyber operations would likely be part of this package too, quietly targeting Russian logistics and communications networks. For Americans, the effects would arrive indirectly. Higher energy prices as markets brace for risk, financial volatility as investors flee uncertainty, and the knowledge that family members in the military might soon be sent to the front line of deterrence. This would be a show of resolve without crossing into open war, yet it would raise the temperature sharply and leave less space for future restraint. The third path is escalation. If the drone attack were confirmed as deliberate and if it caused casualties, political pressure to invoke Article 5 for real combat operations would skyrocket. This could mean airstrikes on Russian military assets near the border, naval blockades in the Baltic Sea, or even the establishment of no-fly zones. The Guardian warns that this is where the fog of escalation sets in, the moment when every move can be interpreted as hostile and trigger an uncontrollable chain of reactions. For Americans, this would be the point where the war stops being hypothetical. Reserve units would be activated. Markets could crash. Cyber attacks on U.S. infrastructure would become likely. And the fear that a conventional clash could spiral into nuclear brinkmanship would become part of everyday life. So here is the critical point. Article 5 is not a switch that automatically unleashes war. It is a door. Once opened, what comes through depends on how 32 nations choose to walk through it. The question is, if Poland pushes that door, which path will America choose to walk? If Article 5 were triggered, Moscow would not just sit and wait for NATO's response to land. It would move, fast and asymmetrically, striking where the alliance is most vulnerable. According to Reuters, Western intelligence agencies are already watching several key flashpoints, places where Russia could apply pressure without directly attacking Poland again. The first is Belarus. Officially an ally, Belarus hosts Russian troops and serves as a launch pad for missiles and drones. AP News reports that joint military drills are underway right now near the Polish border. In the event of escalation, Moscow could flood Belarus with more forces, turning it into a forward staging area to threaten NATO's eastern flank. For Americans, this matters because U.S. troops are stationed just across the border in Poland. Any sudden buildup would put them within direct range of Russian artillery for the first time since the Cold War. The second is Kaliningrad. This tiny Russian enclave wedged between Poland and Lithuania is one of the most heavily militarized regions in Europe. It holds nuclear-capable Iskander missiles, advanced air defenses, and naval assets on the Baltic Sea. As reported by The Guardian, military planners have long called Kaliningrad a pressure valve for Russia. If Moscow feels cornered, it could close parts of the Baltic to NATO ships, disrupt commercial shipping lanes, and jam GPS systems across northern Europe. This would not just be a European headache. It would hit U.S. supply lines and force the Pentagon to divert naval resources from other theaters like the South China Sea. The third is the Suwalki Gap. This 60-mile corridor between Poland and Lithuania is NATO's Achilles heel. It is the only land route linking the Baltic states to the rest of the alliance, and it sits between Belarus and Kaliningrad. According to BBC analysis, Russian war games have repeatedly simulated cutting this corridor, isolating Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. If that gap were blocked, American troops in the Baltics could be cut off and surrounded. For U.S. families, that means something personal. Sons and daughters deployed far from home could be trapped behind enemy lines in the opening days of a war. The fourth is the Black Sea. While it seems distant from Poland, it is central to Russian strategy. Reuters notes that Russia has stepped up naval patrols and mine-laying operations near NATO shipping routes from Romania and Bulgaria. Closing parts of the Black Sea would disrupt energy exports, grain shipments, and commercial trade, triggering global price spikes. For Americans, this could translate into empty store shelves, rising food prices, and inflation shocks just as the economy tries to recover. All of these are part of what military analysts call peripheral escalation, striking around the edges to stretch NATO thin, divide its attention, and raise the cost of intervention. It is pressure without direct confrontation, designed to make the alliance think twice. But here is the danger. Each of these pressure points touches American interests directly. They are not just dots on a map, they are triggers that could pull U.S. troops, money, and even homeland security deeper into the conflict. Let us pause and connect the dots. We began with the incident itself. According to Reuters, dozens of Russian drones crossed into Polish airspace, with at least one striking a residential building while civilians watched the news inside. That violation triggered Article 4 of the NATO treaty, which allows any member to call urgent consultations when its security feels threatened. Poland did exactly that, and as AP News confirms, the NATO Council has already convened in emergency session. We then explained the difference between Article 4 and Article 5. Article 4 is the alarm bell. Article 5 is the trigger. Article 5 states that an attack on one member is considered an attack on all, and it obligates every member to respond collectively. It has only been invoked once in history, after the September 11th attacks on the United States. That alone should tell you how serious this threshold is. We looked at what would happen if Poland crossed it. In the first 24 hours, NATO would activate defense plans, surge air patrols, put cyber commands on alert, and start moving reinforcements. Within the first 72 hours, the U.S. would likely send new troops, harden logistics hubs in Poland and the Baltics, and impose the first waves of cyber and economic retaliation on Moscow. But as we noted, this is where what The Guardian calls the fog of escalation sets in. Every move could be misread as an attack, triggering a chain of reactions that no one can fully control. We explored what this means for Americans at home. More military spending, more National Guard call-ups, the real risk of seeing your son or daughter deployed into a war zone in Eastern Europe, rising fuel and food prices as supply chains strain under military pressure, cyber attacks that could hit banks, hospitals, or utilities. This is not some distant skirmish on a map. It is a decision that could reshape American life within days. We outlined 3 scenarios: minimization, where the incident is treated as an error and quietly buried; limited response, with more defenses and sanctions but no direct strikes; and escalation, where NATO takes military action against Russian assets. Crucially, Article 5 does not dictate what kind of response must happen, only that it must be collective. That flexibility is both a strength and a risk. Finally, we mapped the pressure points where Moscow could hit back: Belarus, Kaliningrad, the Suwalki Gap, and the Black Sea. Each of these could fracture NATO's lines, threaten U.S. forces, and destabilize global markets. They are not just geographic flashpoints. They are pressure triggers aimed at Washington itself. And now here's the fact check. Is Article 5 automatic? No. Even if Poland demands it, all 32 NATO members must agree unanimously. Is it likely? Only if clear forensic evidence proves a deliberate Russian attack, and even then, the form of response could range from symbolic to full-scale military. Has it ever been used before? Yes, but only once, and only after 3,000 Americans were killed on 9/11. So remember this: we are closer to the threshold than at any point since the Cold War, but crossing it would be a leap into the unknown. And in that leap, every miscalculation could echo back to American homes. So here is where all the threads converge. The real question is not whether more drones will cross the Polish border. The real question is when one of them will hit something, or someone, that no leader can ignore. According to BBC reporting, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk warned that his country is at its closest point to open conflict since the Second World War. That is not political theater. It is a warning from the front line. And this is the dilemma for NATO. If the alliance stays silent after a deadly strike, its deterrence crumbles. The whole point of Article 5 is to convince any adversary that an attack on one means a fight with all. But if NATO responds with force, it could ignite a continental war with a nuclear-armed Russia. This is what strategists call the deterrence paradox. The shield that keeps the peace can also be the spark that breaks it. For the United States, this choice is even heavier. America is not just another NATO member, it is the backbone of the alliance. If Article 5 is invoked, it will be American bombers, American carriers, and American sons and daughters who carry the first weight of that decision. That is why, as AP News notes, Washington has been cautious, signaling support for Poland but stopping short of promising automatic retaliation. The White House knows that once the trigger is pulled, there is no way to half-fire Article 5. And yet hesitation carries its own price. If Russia senses division, it will push harder. According to Reuters, the Kremlin has already declined to comment on the drones, which many analysts interpret as strategic ambiguity, a way to keep NATO guessing. In that guessing game lies the danger. As The Guardian warns, wars often begin not with declarations, but with silence, misread as weakness. Here is the thought to leave you with. Imagine the moment the North Atlantic Council meets behind closed doors. The screens show wreckage in eastern Poland. Casualty numbers tick upward. The Polish delegate calls for Article 5. Around the table sit 31 other nations, each calculating risk, history, politics, survival. One vote can hold back war. One vote can release it. And the decision must come not in years, but in hours. This is the razor's edge. If the alliance blinks, its credibility may shatter. If it strikes, the world may tip into the fog of escalation. The true challenge is not military, it is psychological. Choosing in minutes a path that will define decades. So now the question passes to you. If you were sitting at that table, would you vote to invoke Article 5, or would you hold back to avoid the point of no return? If you found this breakdown valuable, make sure to subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next episode. And now we want to hear from you. Picture yourself at that NATO table, the screens flashing red, the world holding its breath. Would you vote to invoke Article 5, risking a war with Russia, or would you try to hold the line and hope restraint keeps the peace? Tell us what you would do and why. Your perspective could spark the debate we all need to have before someone else makes that decision for us.